Hey, Dr. C here with you. Let's talk about the role of nutrition in thyroid function. And for starters, I want to make it clear why diet matters to thyroid disease. Basically, the process of thyroid hormone production involves rearranging nutrients. And if those nutrients are there in the wrong amounts, the thyroid can't function properly. And furthermore, this rearranging process is also supported by a big range of enzymes and other activating compounds, antioxidants, and these are also contingent upon levels of important nutrients. Now, some of the big players we'll talk about are going to be iodine, tyrosine, selenium, iron, and zinc. So the basic process is that the body takes the protein tyrosine, the amino acid tyrosine, and makes that into a large chain, a large complex. And that complex has the place to seat about 13 different iodine atoms. When it's all filled up, the whole complex bends and folds, and those iodine atoms link up with adjacent ones, and those make thyroid hormones. Those produce T3 and T4. So if there's a single iodine here and a double iodine there, those bend up. The single and the double make T3, and two doubles make T4. It's about that simple. And when they're formed, they're then brought across the thyroid cells back into the bloodstream and released per the body's wishes. Now, this involves oxidizing iodine, and that's done by thyroid peroxidase, which is dependent upon iron. This also requires metabolism of iodine and regulation of it, which largely depends on deiodinase enzymes. Many of these need zinc. And then finally, there's a big range of antioxidants used within the thyroid to protect against damage from iodine. Iodine releases a great deal of free radicals, and these are harmful if they're not well managed. And a lot of these antioxidants depend upon selenium. Big ones there include glutathione and also superoxide dismutase. Now, when we think about iodine, it ultimately comes from the diet primarily, and we think about iodine-rich foods. There's a paradox here, and the paradox is that the thyroid needs iodine so badly that a little bit too much can cause the same problems that too little can. Is that kind of weird or what? It's weird and it's not intuitive, but yeah, too much iodine can have the net effect of too little iodine. Think about it this way. Right now, I'm speaking to you, I've got a camera running, I've got some lights, there's a lot of stuff plugged in, right? Now, there's current, there's electricity going through the wires of my home to make all this possible. And if there was no power, like say the power went out my neighborhood, well, it would all go dark, right? On the other hand, think about this. If there was 10 times more current than there should be, what happens? You break a fuse, you trip a breaker. And now there's no current in the house. It's just like the power went out. So way too much has the same effects of too little. And it's the same story in your thyroid. The reason for that is the thyroid needs iodine in such exacting concentrations that there's like a bouncer outside the bar. And this bouncer will let iodine in if there's room for more. But if there's not only will it not let any in, it'll throw out the stuff that's already in there. And what that does is when someone gets more than they need, the effects are kind of like if there were way too little. So we think about where iodine comes from, and a lot of foods have it. The wrinkle here is that those prone to thyroid disease can easily get enough. They almost never have a problem getting too little. In fact, there's only been a few handfuls of cases of iodine deficiency in the last 40 years, and nearly all of them involve people that have gastrointestinal disease, like a lot of their intestinal tract has been removed surgically, and or their diet is almost exclusively certain types of raw vegetables. And I mean pretty much exclusively, like they only eat, I saw one young man who for about 6 months, his diet was 95% raw broccoli. No kidding. He put raw broccoli in a powerful blender. That's pretty much what he did. And, a motivational speaker told him and others that that was a good way to go. And being a young man, he did it to the nth degree. And the poor boy developed an enlarged thyroid because of it. He got an iodine deficiency. But those cases are pretty rare because we find it in lots of foods. So those with thyroid disease, their main wrinkle is getting more than is healthy rather than less that is healthy. And it's worth them being aware of which foods have too much that they should look out for. The biggest one there is seaweed, aka sea vegetables. These are things that Probably the average American, I'm in the Midwest, they're not a big part of the diet for most Midwesterners, but for many people they are. A lot of health enthusiasts. I ate them a lot when I was younger, but they possess so much iodine that they're not really safe. They almost always cause problems for those with thyroid disease. So a simple thing to avoid. Likewise, iodized salt. So salt can have naturally occurring iodine or iodine synthetically added into it. In both of those cases, the amounts become problematic for those with thyroid disease. So which types have naturally occurring iodine? Well, basically sea salt and then Himalayan salt are both very rich in naturally occurring iodine. Then we think about seafood from the ocean, especially fin fish from the ocean, as opposed to scallops. And also dairy foods. With dairy foods, iodine is more of a contaminant and a byproduct of processing. And then also we see a fair amount in egg yolks. So then we see processed grains. So many people with thyroid disease, they cut out gluten and they cut out dairy and they find that it's helpful for them. But it's funny when gluten is looked at by itself or casein or whey are studied by themselves, they don't seem to be a problem for the thyroid. But in the form of foods that most people consume them, these things are carrying a lot of iodine. So the iodine is probably a bigger driver than simply the foods themselves. Another big question about food that comes up is goitrogenic foods. So goitrogenic foods, they're talked about a lot because many will talk in thyroid nutrition about these being problematic. By definition, a goitrogen is something that generates a goiter, and a goiter is an enlarged thyroid. So it would seem logical that foods that are categorized as goitrogens would have to be a problem for someone with thyroid disease. For starters, which foods are they? Well, there's soy, cruciferous vegetables, sweet potatoes, strawberries, tea, millet, coffee, peanuts, chickpeas. Now, that's not an exhaustive list. There's very few plant foods that don't have some properties of being goitrogenic. These are things that still exist in a lot of nutrition guidelines because they were relevant in some situations historically and in some rather rare contexts. But quite simply, they're not relevant in the modern world when our diet comes from a wide range of foods that were grown in a wide range of places. In times past where people had very few foods that were all local, if they happened to have extremely deficient iodine in the soil, and their diet was highly based on one or two main foods, if those few main foods did bind with iodine, that could make some people more likely to develop iodine deficiencies. And that was a problem a great deal in the past. As of 2014, there were 0 countries listed by the World Health Organization as severely iodine deficient. There were 7 that had mild iodine deficiency, none that were severe or moderate. If you go back as recent as 1992, there was 112 countries with severe deficiencies. So it wasn't that long ago that this was actually a real concern in many parts of the world. But it's not in the modern world, and the more severe forms are really not anywhere anymore. So what's the relevance of goitrogenic foods? Well, don't live off of only raw broccoli. And I'm not saying avoid broccoli. And I'm not saying you must cook all of your broccoli to death, not even. But just know that you want a mixture of good foods in the diet. And that's the thing. The best food for thyroid patients are foods that are diverse. You want foods that have a wide range of some of those helpful nutrients that we can get too little of, like the selenium, the iron, and the zinc, and I'll touch on those, whilst minimizing the foods that have inappropriate amounts of iodine. Some of the top ones for selenium would be Brazil nuts, sunflower seeds, brown rice. Iron, a lot of foods have this. Of course, meat, dark poultry, lentils, white beans are very rich in that. Greens, leafy greens are good sources as well. And zinc, we think about pumpkin seeds, lentils, many others. So the conclusion is that diet can make a big difference. And studies that were done on regulating iodine intake were shown to reverse thyroid disease for most adults, as in like 60 to 78% of adults. So if you do carefully regulate iodine, if you do get a wide range of healthy nutrients, there's a good chance of things recovering. And I wrote about this in the Thyroid Reset Diet. I took those studies and I combined them in a way to where you would get to your iodine target while still eating an overall healthy diet and also addressing other factors that are important for your thyroid, like getting these kinds of nutrients and having a nice balance of important macronutrients. So please know that diet can make a big difference for your thyroid. Many people pursue diets that may be good for some and may have merits in some cases, but haven't been shown through studies to be helpful for most people with thyroid disease. Meanwhile, iodine regulation has been studied, and most can reverse adult thyroid disease, whether it be hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's. Also helpful for Graves' disease as an adjunct along with medication for Graves' disease. But there's so much room for diet to benefit, so be aware of that and know that the Thyroid Reset Diet gives you the more specific guidelines toward that. All right, Dr. C with you. Take good care. We'll talk in really soon.